Aphelocoma. Forward. Dearest reader, I have compiled hours upon hours of interviews, research, and careful studies into the following recounting. I am presenting it here for your edification. As much as I have endeavored to make the telling of the tale enjoyable, I hope that you walk away from this experience having gained something. Entertainment, knowledge, solace. These I have tried my best to lace through the lines and words of what follows. May you reach the end having enjoyed the journey, and may your journey continue through many stories yet untold. Best wishes, your humble narrator. Chapter 1. The Owl and the Wren. In a quiet town nestled high up in a valley in southern Oregon, a rainstorm steadily pattered away. It had been raining almost constantly since late the night before, and while that was somewhat unusual, the townsfolk didn't seem to mind it too much. The tourists staying in town, however, were very vocal in their complaints. The local Shakespearean theater had a showing of The Tempest scheduled in their large outdoor theater, and despite being thematically appropriate, the 1,000 or so travelers who had come to see it did not relish the prospect of being soaked and chilled to the bone in a fall rainstorm. Since Oregonians don't believe in umbrellas, the tourists had to settle with rain ponchos. In a downtown block, nestled quaintly in that quiet town in southern Oregon, sat a bar. And in that bar were two people, a bartender and their last patron for the night. The bartender stood tall and wide, with a soft face that betrayed the fact they hadn't yet reached 30. The patron sat, her silvery hair spilling out of a messy bun that had seen too much of the day to continue holding its shape. She cradled her glass, savoring the last sips of an Irish coffee she had ordered to warm herself up. The bartender was wiping down counters, putting away various bottles and containers, generally trying to close up without interrupting their conversation. The two of them had talked for a good while about their lives, jobs, theater, all kinds of things. They had kept each other good company. The patron drank the last of her coffee and paused. "I suppose it's a bit too late for another one, isn't it?" "Sorry, once the kitchen closes up, I can't serve anymore. I can get you a regular coffee, though?" The bartender gestured toward the coffee pots, still warm and half full. "Maybe decaf." "Oh, that's sweet of you, but I'd best be going." She looked around the bar. "Oh, my goodness, I didn't realize I was the last one here. I'm sorry for taking so much of your time." "I didn't mind, really. You were wonderful company." The bartender gave her a kind smile before printing off her tab and handing it to her. The patron quickly skimmed the bill before reaching into her wallet to pull out enough cash to cover her drinks and leave a very generous tip. She slowly climbed off her bar stool, saying, "Here, you keep the change. I'm going to use the restroom, and then I will be out of your hair." She paused. "My name is Carol, by the way. It was delightful to meet you. You have a good night, young man. Sorry, young person." "I'm Af, and you too. I hope you get back to your hotel without getting rained on too much." Af put the last things away, finished wiping everything down, and they turned to face the register on the back of the bar to ring in the charge and count out the change for their tip. Af dutifully counted the till to make sure everything was accurate. As they were finishing up, they heard the rain stop, quite suddenly. They turned to face the windows, looking onto the street, and were startled by a strange figure standing inside the bar. They had a hood covering their head and a walking staff in their hands. They stood, silhouetted by the street lights. This was definitely not Carol. The stranger stood by the windows, staring out onto the street. "Excuse me, I'm sorry, but we're closed." The figure didn't move. They seemed to stand about 5'6", much smaller than Af. The bartender didn't feel threatened by this stranger, but the silence was unnerving. "Hello? Can I help you?" Af slowly walked out from behind the bar and padded over to the stranger's side. Af moved their hand up to wave it between the stranger's face and the window. As their hand entered the stranger's field of view, the stranger flinched and turned quickly. Af's heart jumped in their chest, and their hand retracted faster than they would have thought possible. The stranger's hands moved quickly to pull their hood down, revealing their face. He was small and frail, his face furrowed by wrinkles earned with age. His close-cropped chestnut-brown hair ran through with graying patches. Af had the distinct impression that this man had once stood a good length taller and been a fair bit broader, but time had weathered him down to his current stature. "Who do you think you are to scare an old man like that? My heart's only got so much left in it. Why'd you go and make it pitter-pitter like that? Shit!" He pronounced shit as if it had 2 syllables, like shit. His voice also broke the sudden quiet of the late night with a distinct whistling quality that made Af think of a steam locomotive whistle. Perhaps fitting, since his manner of speech also reminded Af of the time period when steam locomotives were common. "I'm sorry," Af said, taking a step back to give the man some room. "I was calling out to you, but you didn't seem to hear me. I wanted to see if you were okay." "'Course I'm okay. My ears hadn't popped is all. Couldn't hear you proper. Thankfully, your little fright there did the trick. Shit!" The man stuck the tips of his pinkies into his ears and wiggled them around, as if trying to pop his ears again. There was a pause while the old man fiddled with his ears. Af was still reeling from the scare, and before they could think, they asked, "Did you just come over the pass from California?" The man's eyes lit up at the mention of the state south of them. He pulled his fingers from his ears and smacked his lips twice. "Did I come from California, you say? Well, in a manner of speaking, that is, yes. Yes, I did." His voice was much quieter now, and he seemed to carefully consider his words. He looked out the window as if searching for something. "My name is Acanthus, and I'm looking for a fellow that goes by the name Aphelocoma, though he might have shortened it to something else. It is a mouthful, I'll tell you that." He looked back up to Af expectantly. Af paused, unsure of who this strange man was or how he knew Af's full name, or rather, he knew a version of it. Af wasn't a shortened version of a longer name, it was the full first name. Af's last name, however, was Lacoma, so it seemed Acanthus had smashed the two together. Af gave Acanthus a good look down and up. Acanthus was mostly covered by a faded brown cloak, soaked with rain and frayed slightly at the bottom. The bits of clothing Af could see through the neck of the cloak were strange. It didn't look like a t-shirt or a jacket. It seemed to resemble some of the costumes Af had seen in the plays they'd gone to see at the local theater when they were younger. This one was yellow, with a large slit leading down from the neck, but it was mostly tied up through some lacing. "Well, I'm not a fellow, but my name is Aphelocoma." Acanthus raised one bushy eyebrow in response. He took a step closer to Af. The poor man almost had to crane his neck back to look the bartender in the eye while this close. "Aphelocoma, you say? I apologize for the fellow comment. I was told I was looking for a man. Clearly I was wrong. I do have one strange request. The man, a person I'm looking for has a birthmark on the back left side of their neck. Do you mind if I look at your neck?" Af furrowed their brow, now doubly confused. Who was it that sent this man to look for them? How did they know Af's name, and how did they know about Af's birthmark? Af paused, but on an impulse, grabbed the side of their collared shirt, pulled it away from their neck, and leaned over for Acanthus to get a better look. "I know that shape anywhere. You's indeed an Aphelocoma." Af stood back up, adjusting their collar. "Can you tell me what this is all about? Why are you looking for me, and who exactly told you to come looking for me? I've never even been to California." "Those are all excellent questions, Af, and someone will answer them for you, but not me. I have to ask you to follow me." Af cocked their head, taking a step back. "Sorry, but I have to close up here, and it's late. I should be getting home soon." Af was now back in full customer service mode, desperately trying to think of a polite way to tell this old man to shove off so they could finish their shift, go home, and sleep. Acanthus paused, his eyes calmly peering up underneath his overgrown eyebrows. There was a moment of silence before he abruptly looked down, pulled out a pocket watch, and then made a move for the front door. "Oh, of course. How rude of me to barge in this late and treat a stranger so familiarly. I'll leave you to your work there, Af, but I hope when you have some time soon we can meet again and discuss some things." He had made it to the door by the end of this statement. He turned to look at Af, who was slightly stunned at how easily this man was relenting. "You have a good night now, and get home safe." And with that, he walked out the door. Af watched him through the front window as he walked down the sidewalk, heading north up the road. A few moments after Acanthus was out of sight, the pattering of rain sounded again, and sheets of rain washed onto the sleepy town. "What the fuck was that?" Af said, aloud. They shook their head and returned to closing up. After getting the bar locked up and dropping their deposit for the night, Af gave the place a quick walkthrough, making sure there were no strange old men sneaking in when they hadn't looked. They walked out the back door, locking it behind them. They pulled up the hood of their jacket and looked around the alley. It was a quiet night in Ashland. The gentle rain continued tapping on, but no cars were on the street this late. No one was out walking down the sidewalks either. Af was alone. The peace was broken by a hooting coming from above. Af's eyes shot up, searching for the danger. What they found was a barn owl, perched on the next building over. Af had never been this close to an owl before, and despite their racing heart, they took a moment to examine the bird. Its head was pulled low, pointing straight at Af with a predatory menace that put Af on edge. The unblinking eyes of the bird staring daggers into Af's soul. After a moment, Af turned and walked to their car, trying to calm down. It is here, dear reader, that I would like to take a pause in recounting this story to you to discuss owls. One thing about owls that many people don't fully grasp is that many iconic facets and features of an owl are designed to make their sight as silent as possible, particularly for those owls who hunt mammals. For example, the feathers on the leading and trailing edges of their wings contain many small serrations, much like a comb, so as to break up the air passing over them. This leads to smaller and smaller currents of air turbulence, which leads to less noise. These features were finely tuned through millions of years of trial and error and evolutionary pressure to make them silent. This silence evolved for one primary purpose: to make them deadly efficient killers. With this information in mind, I have no doubt that you, dear reader, will not be surprised by what happens next. Af, standing in front of their car and fumbling with their keys, felt the sharp pain of several small daggers digging their way into the back of their head. These small daggers impaled Af with such force that they were thrown onto their car. The daggers seemed to release momentarily, and Af could see a large wing flapping rapidly above them. Why didn't I hear it approaching? Af thought confusedly, not having had the advantage of the brief owl anatomy lesson that you, dear readers, did. Af cried out in pain. Despite the thickness of the hood they wore, Af could tell they were bleeding in quite a few places. As the owl flapped chaotically to remain in place, it tried to claw again at Af. Their arms flew over their head, trying to bash the animal away, seemingly to no avail. The owl appeared to dodge every swing and still be close enough to scratch at Af. The surprises just kept coming for Aphelocoma as they heard a dull thwack. With some trepidation, Af peeked between their arms and saw that old man, Acanthus, standing next to them, holding his very large walking stick like a baseball bat. He seemed to be standing taller now, with a much surer footing to his stance. "Run! There's an assassin and a bitch!" Acanthus yelled, keeping his eyes firmly locked onto the owl. "Fuck you, you old coot! Why don't you drop that stick and fight me like a real bird?" Aph was surprised to hear another voice. They turned quickly to find the source, and it was coming from the owl? The bird was reeling and standing back up from being knocked down, but there was no mistaking it. That bird just talked. The owl leapt back into the air directly at Acanthus, trying to dodge his upward swing. The attempt was only slightly successful as the owl went careening into the trees above. Acanthus turned to Aph, grabbing them by the jacket and pulling them out of the alley, screaming, "I told you to run! Now follow me!" The instruction to follow wasn't entirely necessary, as Acanthus had a death grip on Aph's jacket. Nevertheless, Aph obliged, and the two of them ran out of the alley and onto the main sidewalk. Aph looked back just in time to see the owl clambering to the edge of one of the trees. One of its wings didn't look quite right, and a leg was tucked up under the body, like it was painful to step on. The two sprinted down the street, heading towards the theater. Aph kept looking up and behind them to see if the owl was following. Acanthus had no such preoccupations, and stared straight ahead of them. Once they had made the block or two trip to the theater, Acanthus pulled them off the sidewalk and onto the paved bricks that delineated the theater grounds. He led Aph up the hill towards the oldest outdoor theater before stopping himself. "Shit, that's right, it's blocked off now. What other path can we take?" Acanthus scanned the small plaza they stood in, a small grassy slope separating the larger theater at the top of the hill from the older buildings and slightly newer theater at the bottom. Acanthus scanned the small plaza they stood in, a small grassy slope separating the larger theater at the top of the hill from the older buildings and the slightly newer theater at the bottom. Acanthus's eyes swept past to the corridor between the second theater and the old buildings and lit up. "This way!" No sooner did he say those words than Aph saw a figure step out between the buildings across the street behind them. She was somewhat thin, in a large and thick coat with long, stringy, pale hair. She seemed to be limping on her left leg, and her right arm was folded over her chest, having an unnatural bend to the forearm that Aph did not like. "Get back here, you decrepit fiend, and let me take the foundling prince boy. I don't have to kill you, you know." Aph was dumbfounded. It was the exact same voice that came from the owl a few moments ago. Unfortunately, Aph didn't have time to ponder the full implications of what was going on, as Acanthus roughly yanked them in the direction opposite of this stranger. They fled down a short set of stairs and came to a small crossroads. To the right was a ramp down to the street. Ahead of them was another stairs, leading to what Aph knew was Lithia Park. But Acanthus brought them the third way. Hugging the concrete foundations of the newer theater, there was a path leading round the back. After 20 feet or so, this path terminated at an employee entrance. Acanthus leaned off the right side of the path, looking up to the left, straining to see what was around them. "There it is!" And with a leap, Acanthus jumped up onto the fencing enclosing the pathway, climbing up and over the edge onto the steep, ivy-covered hills the theater stood on. "Follow me, boy! Sorry, not boy. I'll get there eventually. You need to get over here now, though." Acanthus gesticulated wildly, indicating that he wanted Aph to climb over the same way he had. Aph steadied themselves and started climbing up the fence, having a decidedly harder time than Acanthus did. With effort, though, they hauled themselves up and over. Acanthus started skirting along, clinging to the ivy and any exposed rocks for stability. "It should be right about here." Acanthus rounded a corner on the hill and seemed to find a flat platform. Aph looked around. They were just below the old theater building, which seemed to come out of the hillside itself. To the right, facing the park, were a tightly knit group of bushes and trees, seeming to hide this spot from plain view. The platform they stood on was simply a flattened rocky outcropping, which abutted a small rocky cliff face. The cliff was covered in ivy, like the rest of the hill, but Acanthus reached in and parted it, revealing a dark passageway through the rock. "Where did you go, you old man?
I will find that pathetic orphan if I have to kill every last human in this god's-forsaken town. Blazes, it's bigger than I remember.
Aph knelt low and looked through some of the bushes. They could see that woman limping into Lithia Park, casting her eyes all around, searching. In a low voice, Acanthus hissed,
Aphelocoma, quick! Get in here before she catches us. We need to go.
Aph stood, looked at the thin tunnel, looked at Acanthus, and looked back to the tunnel.
Why not? This day's already been so goddamn weird. Let's climb into the dark cave. That's the spirit.
Aph couldn't believe what they were doing, but they stepped into the dark, and they heard Acanthus following close behind.